So beginning in the book of Matthew chapter 26, the gospel tells the story of Jesus' arrival into Jerusalem for the Passover week. And on the last night of this week, before the cross, the day that is celebrated as Maundy Thursday, or what we're celebrating, actually what I'm teaching this on today, Jesus instructed his disciples on this day to prepare for this last Passover meal. And to say the least, this meal was going to be a deeply symbolic and important moment in the Jesus story. So first, let's start with a little bit of background on the Passover to make sense of that. Passover in itself was very deeply significant, highly symbolic. And at its core, that meal that Jews celebrate today was about freedom. Is a remembrance of Israel's deliverance from slavery out of Egypt. And every element of that meal told about that story. The unleavened bread reminded them of their leaving Egypt in a hurry. The bitter herbs recounted the pain of slavery. The lamb and the wine that was on the table recalled the last plague and the blood of the lamb that caused the angel of death to pass over every Israelite home. We'll talk a little bit more about that later on. And lastly, I don't know if you know this, but they ate the meal reclining to symbolize the posture of freedom, because slaves, of course, never reclined. And so they ate the meal reclining, celebrating their freedom out of Egypt. So first of all, Passover looked back to remember that really grand story of deliverance from slavery out of Egypt that Israel experienced. But it wasn't only backward looking, it also over time became this meaning of, or meal of longing and hope. See, after Egypt, Israel would once again experience oppression. They would be exiled by Assyria and then later on by Babylon. We learn that God allowed for this to happen as a punishment of their turning away from him. But during those times of exile, they continued to eat the meal. And as they did so, they then not only looked back, but they also looked forward, trusting that just that God had delivered them in the past, he was going to do so again in the future. But there was another layer still. The prophets, these guys, Isaiah and Jeremiah and others like them. As I just mentioned, they were the ones that had told Israel that the exile to Assyria and Babylon was tied to their turning away from God. But these guys also said that one day they would also be set free from their captors and that their deliverance was to be seen as a sign to them, a sign that God had forgiven them and restored them. Isaiah said to them that on that day, he says, "You will go out in joy and be led forth in peace. The mountains and the hills will burst into song before you, and all of the trees will clap their hands." So Passover then came to represent these three things: freedom from slavery, hope of a future deliverance, and also coming from the prophets, the promise that God was forgiving and restoring to his people. So let's then, with that bit of background, go back now then to this final Passover meal with Jesus. It's nighttime. He's reclining with his disciples for this meal one last time. But here now, he does something completely unexpected. And he makes the meal about himself. The unleavened bread, he said, was now his broken body. The cup of wine that they took from the table, he said, was his soon-to-be shed blood. This meal then, already full of all of these symbols, was becoming now even more charged, more symbolic. But what was it that Jesus was saying? He was really saying to them that everything that the Passover points to, freedom, deliverance, forgiveness from sin, restoration, all of these things were now going to be fulfilled in and through him. In some ways, this talk of freedom and deliverance maybe wasn't surprising to the people of Israel, and certainly not to the disciples. This is what everyone was expecting the Messiah to do. And by that point, as we just saw a few days earlier when Jesus made this triumphal entry into the city of Jerusalem, almost everybody at that point had concluded that Jesus was the Messiah, this word that literally means the anointed one. The Messiah of Israel was really supposed to do this, to bring about freedom and deliverance and restoration. But it was also commonly understood, and especially by Jesus' day, that this was going to happen, this freedom and restoration was going to happen through a victorious battle. That the Messiah was going to be like a David, a conquering king, a waging warrior, and he was going to wage war against Israel's oppressors, who in that time, of course, was Rome. Rome had subjugated the people of Israel. But on this night, at this meal, Jesus once more didn't talk about war or military uprising. Instead, he talked to them about his broken body and his shed blood. And he wove these things into this meal. It seems that for Jesus, Israel's deliverance, its freedom recalled and symbolized in this meal, was not going to come to them through war, or at least not war as they understood it, but it was going to come through his death, the death of the Messiah. Maybe this will make more sense if we could put on our imagination hats and imagine how that evening may have unfolded, fill in some of the cracks of the dialogue that the Gospels doesn't share. Just imagining, of course. So the friends are reclining around the table. Jesus is the host of the meal. And he looks to them and he says, come, let's have this freedom meal together, brothers. They respond, amen, Jesus, let's do this. And Jesus looks at them and says, children, I want you to see what I'm about to do. I want you to have eyes to see. This freedom meal that we're all about to have again, I want you to understand it's about me, my broken body, and this drink is now me, my shed blood. Do you see? I want you to understand I'm making this meal about my shed blood and my broken body. The disciples respond, well, Jesus, what are you talking about? You're going to die? You can't die. Is that what you're saying? You're going to die? Your shed blood, your broken body? You have to lead us in victory, in battle, into deliverance, in captivity, out of captivity, into forgiveness. That's what the Messiah does. Jesus looks back and says, friends, I don't know how many times I have to tell you this. I've tried so many times. You are not listening to me. What they did to all the other prophets, they're going to soon do to me. I'm going to be killed by them, but do not be afraid. Listen again to what I'm saying in this meal. I know what the scriptures teach. The Messiah, the servant of Israel, he's going to release the captives of Israel from slavery and lead them into the kingdom. I know this. And I have come, yes, to fight this battle. In fact, this hour by which I am going to fight this battle is coming very soon. It's why we are now here in Jerusalem. Jesus, they say, yeah, okay, now he's back on track. We're with you in this. But again, Jesus comes back to them and says, but in this meal, I'm telling you now how I'm going to fight the battle. Think about the lamb that this meal recalls. You remember the story of Israel being set free from Egypt? How the Israelites put the blood of a slaughtered lamb on the doorposts of their homes, and how every home that had that blood, that the angel of death would pass over that home. And because of that dreadful event where death came to the unborn children, or to the firstborn children of Egypt, but not Israel, how in that then the Pharaoh let Israel free. I'm telling you now that I am like that lamb. I'm like this lamb that's on this table. But except it's through my blood now that Israel is going to be set free. The disciples, again, still confused, they respond, but Jesus, our prophets told us that the Messiah would be like David and that he would fight and be victorious in a grand battle that would finally, once and for all overthrow all of our oppressors. That's what he would do. Once again, Jesus comes back, but I know this is what you thought the prophets told you, but all along, the Christ, I've been telling you something different. My weapons are not of this world. I will turn the cheek. I will be silent. I will not cry out. I will not mock. I will even forgive. Father, forgive them. They do not know what they are doing. And as I'm telling you here tonight, in the end, I am and I will lay down my very life. But listen again to what I'm saying here. when I fight this battle, that is when I die, it is there that your freedom will be secured. Because just as the blood of the Passover lamb secured freedom for your ancestors, so my blood and my body is going to secure freedom for you. So, that little imagination exercise over, that you can see that what a major plot twist this all was, but it's exactly what their prophets had been telling them. Isaiah, for instance, tells the story of Israel being led away into captivity and punished for their sins. But then toward the end of Isaiah, in chapters 42 and 49, and chapter 50 and 52 and 53, we start to read of one that's referred to as the servant of Israel, another expression. And as we read Isaiah, what becomes clear is that it's going to be through this servant's suffering and healing and forgiveness that healing and forgiveness and deliverance, are going to unfold for all of God's people. These words from Isaiah 53 are perhaps the most famous example of Isaiah speaking about this. Isaiah says there, "Who has believed our message, and to whom has the arm of the Lord been revealed? He grew up before him like a tender shoot, and like a root out of dry ground. He had no beauty or majesty to attract us to him, nothing in his appearance that we should desire him. He was despised and rejected by humankind, a man of suffering and familiar with pain, like one from whom people hid their faces. He was despised, and we held him in low esteem. Surely he took up our pain and bore our suffering, yet we considered him punished by God, stricken by him and afflicted. But he was pierced for our transgressions. He was crushed for our iniquities. The punishment that brought us peace was on him, and by his wounds we are healed. We are all like sheep, we've gone astray. Each of us has turned to his own way, and the Lord has laid on him the iniquity of us all. He was oppressed and afflicted, yet he did not open his mouth. He was led like a lamb to the slaughter, and as a sheep before its shearers is silent, so he did not open his mouth. By oppression and judgment he was taken away. Yet who of his generations protested? For he was cut off from the land of the living. For the transgressions of my people he was punished. He was assigned a grave with the wicked and with the rich in his death, though he had done no violence, nor was any deceit in his mouth. Yet it was the Lord's will to crush him and cause him to suffer, and through the Lord makes his life an offering for sin. He will see his offspring and prolong his days, and the will of the Lord will prosper in his hand. After he has suffered, he will see the light of life and be satisfied. By his knowledge, my righteous servant will justify many, and he will bear their iniquities. Therefore, I will give him a portion among the great, and he will divide the spoils with the strong, because he has poured out his life unto death, and was numbered with the transgressors. For he bore the sin of many, and made intercession for the transgressors." Now, with our 2020 hindsight, we read that and say, well, it's obvious, right? That's Jesus. He's the great servant, and he will suffer in order to make a way for deliverance and freedom and forgiveness. But, and this is really critical for us to understand, we need to remember that our hindsight was not the hindsight of those people at that time. And at that time in Jesus' day, the people believed that Isaiah's servant was actually the nation of Israel itself. And they believed that what Isaiah was saying was that Israel was going to be healed and forgiven and delivered only through its own suffering. Through your wounds, servant Israel, you will be healed. And that's how Jews in Jesus' day, and frankly still many today, read that passage from Isaiah. But here's where our hindsight now proves 2020 for us, because as we read through the Gospels and the New Testament writings, what we learn is that Jesus himself came to represent, to embody, to personify, fulfill everything that is Israel. All that Israel is becomes yes and amen in him. He is the temple. He is the altar. He is the lamb. He is the priest. He is the prophet. He is the king. And at the Passover meal and the day to follow, he said that he was also the servant of Israel. If the prophet said that the servant Israel would suffer for their sins before freedom came, then he was going to become the servant and suffer in their place at the hands of their true captor and their true enemy, which is key because they thought that their captor and enemy in Jesus' day was Rome. But all along, and here's another plot twist, Jesus was trying to tell them that their true enemy was way worse than Rome, that the true enemy was sin and Satan and death that resided in all of them, that this was their true captor. And at the hands of this captor, then, Jesus was indeed about to suffer. The captor at work in the hearts of men from both Rome and Israel would whip him and mock him and tear at him and pierce his brow and his hands and his feet and his side. And in it all, the mighty deliverer of Israel, the Messiah, just like Isaiah said, would refuse to fight. He would not open his mouth. Silently as a lamb led to the slaughter, he would die. But in that moment of suffering, the promise of healing and deliverance would unfold. You say, why? Because in that moment, Israel's suffering, spoken of by the prophets, remembered in the Passover meal, was finished. It's why Jesus would cry out in the cross, it's finished. The servant of Israel, embodied in Jesus, had completed the punishment. And now, according to the prophets, it said, once the suffering was only one thing remained, their forgiveness and their freedom. For Israel and for all of the nations. Listen how Isaiah says it, you shall go out with joy and be led forth with peace. The Messiah did have to fight a battle. It was his role, everyone knew it, but in the battle he opted to turn the other cheek, to love, to forgive, to suffer for sin as the servant Israel, and in the end he died. And at that moment, I suspect all the forces of hell gasped with their victory, yet at what they couldn't see was that it was at that very moment that their victory was stolen from them for taking the suffering of Israel upon himself and fulfilling the judgment and the punishment of Israel. All that was left for creation was freedom. The long period of exile and suffering spoken of by the prophets was over. Imagine it like this, the moment that Jesus suffered and died, it's like the latch on creation's jail cell clanked open and Jesus screamed out, it's finished. God spoke to Israel, you are free to go. The period of your suffering is over. The man named Jesus became the servant of Israel and he suffered for you. It's finished. The stripes have been paid. The forgiveness is yours and it's in full. But it wasn't just for Israel. In Isaiah 49, another servant song, it's recorded. Listen to what it says there in 49, chapter 1-6. Listen to me, you islands. Hear this, you distant nations. Before I was born, the Lord called me. From my mother's womb, he has spoken my name. He made my mouth like a sharpened sword. In the shadow of his hand, he hid me. He made me into a polished arrow and concealed me in his quiver. He said to me, you are my servant, Israel, in whom I will display my splendor. But I said, I have labored in vain. I have spent my strength for nothing at all. Yet what is due me is in the Lord's hand, and my reward is with God. And now the Lord says, he who formed me in the womb to be his servant, to bring Jacob back to him, to gather Israel to himself. For I am honored in the eyes of the Lord, and my God has been my strength. He says, it's too small a thing for you to be my servant, to restore the tribes of Jacob, and to bring back those of Israel I have kept. I will also make you a light for the Gentiles, that my salvation may reach to the ends of the earth. You see that at the end? Israel was too small of a thing. This was about the salvation, the deliverance to the very ends of the earth. And what would the Messiah require for all of this? We learn about that in Isaiah chapter 55 as well. There it says this, come, all of you who are thirsty, come to the waters, and you who have no money, come, buy, eat, come buy wine and milk without money and without cost. Why spend money on what is not bread and your labor on what does not satisfy? Listen to me and eat what is good, and you will delight in the richest of fares. So what is it that the Lord requires of us? Nothing other than to come to him and to his meal and to receive what we cannot buy. And on this day, as we celebrate this meal of Jesus, we're invited to see that that great King, the servant of the world, the Messiah, he's still reclining as the host of the table. I love that vision, remember, because only those who are free are able to recline. And he's still there, and he's saying to us and to the whole world, you come to this meal, come to this table, come and receive my body and my blood. There's so much more we could talk about. I could link this, for example, to the communion meal that we share today, but for now, we're out of time. So let me say this by conclusion. To those of you who have come to this table and by faith you have received Jesus, you've received his sacrifice, you received his blood and his body into your lives, may your hearts just continue to rejoice in this, to delight in the richest of fares and all that has been accomplished through this. And to those of you who may be still watching this and all of this is new, can I tell you a response? By faith in your heart and your mind, come to Jesus, come to this table by faith. Receive this meal. Tell him that you want this food that he provides, his body and his blood. And allow the forgiveness of that experience that was pronounced through Jesus to wash over you. It's just the first step for you, but it begins there. And may the Lord bless you as you contemplate all of these really profound and wonderful things.